What up? It's TF again. Today we're shooting a video, real quick one on how the heck does this auto trigger work on the J12. On previous instantiations of the CCM marker series, there was an external rod that tied into this pump arm that had a cam attached to it. And what that cam would do is preclude the trigger from firing unless it was in the proper position, unless the back block and everything was at about this position right here. The trigger wouldn't fire. So that cam rocked back and forth, put wear on the Delrin trigger, and it rocked back and forth as you shot the marker. So the platform wasn't as stable as it could be, but users just got used to it, and frankly that's the way it was since the very beginning. And so that's just what we got used to. This marker is very, very different. As you can see, there is no external cam, there's no pin, there's no hole, there's no anything. And then what we've got is a two-stage trigger that you can see. I'm pulling the trigger now, and we see that the sear going down. I'll put this on the side so you can see that. The sear goes down. But if we pick this trigger back, you can see the sear come back up. So what you have is this trigger only operates when this portion of the trigger is forward, okay, and unoccluded. But you can see this has got a roller bearing on the top of it. All right, when that roller bearing gets pushed down, the sear goes back up and the marker can't fire again. Okay, so that's the first part of the trick. Then we have to look at the second part. When you look at a J12, you see this is what recocks the marker. This secondary rod that almost looks like a guide rod to most people actually is a guide rod in that it runs in the block and it runs in the body, but it runs down the body and it's what pushes the hammer back. Before it used to be that there was some way of attaching the pin to the bolt, or the bolt to the hammer with a pin or with a back block and a cocking rod, and it pulled the hammer back. It did so in a non-linear fashion. It came back and then pulled a back block, which then always ended up canting, especially over time. The threads in the back block would get a little bit loose, and it would pull it back. It didn't cause much binding, but I'm sure it did cause some binding over time. The springs are very similar in the J12 as they are in other markers, but I think because of the linear travel of this pump arm, it pushes the marker back in a much more linear fashion, and thus I think, even though the pressures are similar, has an easier feel to it. So because it's doing efficient mechanical motion, it's going to feel like a smoother pumping gun. Now, that's neither here nor there for the auto trigger. That's just something else I've observed. See the ramp on this rod here? I'll point to it with a smaller tool here. See that ramp? It goes down almost like a pin. Now, as you see when you put this together, right, this cam rides on that pin, and when it's in a firing position, it allows the cam trigger to drop back down and allowing the marker to fire. That's what happens when you pump that marker forward. So as it's in its pump position, the marker can't fire. As it's forward, it can fire. It rides on a roller bearing, so it's very smooth. And that's what goes on in that auto trigger. So as you pump the marker, it's back. Now the sear goes up, it catches the hammer back here, and can't fire until that sear is allowed to drop. And again, how that works is the trigger is pulled, that's the first step, and this portion of it hinges forward, drops, and allows that hammer to drop. So what goes on is that bearing rides on that tapered pin and allows the sear to drop or not drop. Now what does that mean for the end user? What it means is that rod sets up this rod length from the factory, and it really isn't adjustable. You really can't set this off. You could turn the back block, I suppose, and change where that back block is when it fires, but it really doesn't matter. This marker fires when it's in the right position and it's set up from the factory that way. Other people like to time their auto trigger a little bit differently. The reality is CCM doesn't allow, this J12 doesn't allow for a lot of tinkering. So if you're a tinkerer, this might not be the marker for you. But it is set up out of the factory. So if you're an axe user, you're coming from the semi-automatic world, or certainly the electro world where the gun either works or it doesn't, that's pretty much what you've got here with the J12. You've got a marker that's set up from the factory, and as long as it stays set up properly, will run forever. If it's not set up properly, it just doesn't work. Of course, it would take a lot of catastrophic failure to bend this break this, shorten this, cut this off. I mean, I don't even know what would have to happen. So in the good ways, there's not a lot of wear on parts. You're running stainless steel on a brass bearing. It's meant to be viscous and roll. In the old way, you'd wear a groove over many, many years on your old Series 5, Series 6, SS25, those sort of things on that old trigger. But they made them out of Delrin, so they were dirt cheap to replace. So that's the trade-off here. They make them out of more expensive parts, but they're made to essentially never break. Or they made them out of cheaper parts so that when they did wear after multiple years, and I've only replaced one trigger in my life, and it was on an old Series 5 that I shot a lot of paint out of. But yeah, I only had to do that once. So there's a little trade-off here. It's not the most tinkerer-friendly. It is user-friendly. That's how the auto trigger works. I hope that made some sense. I wish I had a cutaway body, but hey, there's only 50 of these in existence right now. I don't think you want me cutting one up. I think you want to buy one. So I'll talk to you later. This is TF. Thanks for watching. Peace.